They don't really make 2D platformers anymore. Crash, Lara and Spyro are sort of that. Amazing 2D platformers like the Prince of Persia's Flashback, Another World, and the first two Oddworld games haven't seen any real competition this side of the year 2000. Until now. Trine takes the genre staples, fun running and jumping gameplay, and the beautiful art and music, and adds into the mix physics-based gameplay. This blending of the old and the new works extremely well, and the end result is something pretty great. Trine is set in a fantasy world where the powers that preserve life have withered, and the undead walk the land. A thief, a wizard, and a knight all find themselves in a treasure room at the same time, and an ancient artifact, the Trine, binds their souls together. The three, who are now one, set off on a journey first and foremost to help themselves out of their predicament, but they do of course get caught up in greater events. The story is told through a wonderful narration during the loading screens, as well as banter between the characters at certain points. It's a simple story used just to contextualize things, but it goes far above and beyond what one would expect from a 2D platformer. The three characters are very colourful, each with unique personalities and motives. The knight is interested in proving himself a hero, and the wizard in uncovering the arcane truths of the Trine, while the thief is only interested in the take. Comparisons with the classic Blizzard game The Lost Vikings are unavoidable, but the two games have a different focus. The Lost Vikings, and if you haven't played it, shame on you, is more of a puzzle game with a much slower pace, while Trine is a full-blown platformer with puzzle elements. Like The Lost Vikings though, the three characters you control in Trine do depend on each other, albeit to a lesser extent. The thief is the most agile of the three. Equipped with a bow and a grappling hook, she can take enemies on at long ranges and reach areas the other characters can't by swinging around. The wizard, sporting a classic robe and wizard hat combo, has no weapons. What he does have is the ability to summon boxes and platforms, and to levitate them and certain other objects around the map. The knight, armed with a sword and shield combo, as well as a warhammer, is the warrior of the group, able to plough through enemies and defend himself with the shield. Just to get the obvious out of the way first, Trine is a two-dimensional platformer, meaning every level is a matter of progressing from one end of the map to the other while avoiding traps and environmental dangers, traversing platforms and fighting off enemies. Spikes popping out of the floors, swinging axes, pools of lava, acid and the classic bottomless pit are all dangers you'll face throughout the levels. The game requires a good degree of dexterity, but the fact that you have three characters, which effectively means 3 lives, and a generous checkpoint system for respawning, means things are rarely challenging. In fact, the game is pretty easy until towards the end, when it suddenly and unexpectedly becomes frustratingly difficult. Odds are you'll spend most of your time as the thief. Her grappling hook is too useful to resist. She plays like a chick version of Altair mixed with Spider-Man, and it's a true pleasure to play as her. She's also a slaughterhouse once you get some of her skills up, able to take down stuff almost as quickly as the knight. This really sort of makes the knight nothing but a safety net, while the wizard is close to worthless until you need to make a platform or draw a box. This imbalance between the characters kind of dampens the 3 different characters thing. Trine is at its best when all 3 characters have to be used together in a small area, each character accomplishing a different task. This rarely happens, but it's easy enough to overlook simply because of how awesome the thief is. The inclusion of physics facilitates some fun and interesting gameplay, whether it's a platform suspended on a fulcrum that spins around unless you balance your weight in the middle, or a tower of boxes the wizard is stacking as a makeshift ladder that becomes unbalanced and it comes toppling down, or the way the knight sinks like a rock in water. All the physics stuff is well implemented. You'll see collapsing platforms and swinging platforms whose momentum is determined by your own weight, and other cool physicsy stuff. You can also use physics to crush enemies. The wizard can drop platforms or boxes on enemies, though this is somewhat cumbersome, while the knight can crush them with his immense weight. It's hard not to smile the first time you see that happen. The physicsy stuff isn't overdone, and it adds a great new flavour to an otherwise very old meal. The combat is simple hack and slash stuff for the most part. You can block the attacks of enemies with the knight's shield and then butcher them easily enough, or just take them down at range with the thief. Things get more complicated throughout as different types of enemies with different types of attacks are introduced, and are often thrown at you at the same time, but all fights ultimately degenerate into spamming arrows if you're the thief, or blocking until an enemy attacks and then countering if you're the knight. It's simple but fun for the most part, and does a good job of pacing the game. It becomes problematic though on occasions when large number of enemies spawn. Often there are just too many enemies, and many people will feel an obligation to kill every one of them, as they sometimes drop experience points, and that means standing around killing enemy after enemy as it comes at you, or worse still, having to backtrack when you hear the swish sound of an enemy spawning off screen. The roster of enemies is pretty disappointing too. There are skeletons, and more skeletons. You start fighting the generic sword-wielding skeleton and archer skeleton. Later on there are skeletons with shields and skeletons that blow fire at you, and occasionally even giant skeletons that serve as some kind of a boss. There are a few other enemies that show very rarely, like bats or large spiders, but for the most part it's just skeletons, and it gets boring very quickly, even for a Ray Harryhausen fan like myself. On the whole, the combat is fast and fun, but certainly not without problems. More enemy types would have helped a lot, and perhaps fewer but more difficult enemies. Almost every level has a few secret items stashed in treasure chests. These items offer things like unlimited underwater breathing, improvements to skills, the ability to resurrect a dead character, or just additional health or energy. These secrets, and that word belongs in speech marks, are presumably to give the game replay value, but they aren't very well hidden. I'm generally awful at finding secrets and hidden realms, but I found almost every secret in Trine on my first playthrough. You'll also gain experience points earned for exploration and combat. These experience points eventually yield skill points for you to spend. Each character has 3 skills, with the introduction of new skills being staggered, both to keep the latter levels fresh and to prevent you being overwhelmed in the early stages. There's a whole bunch of experience points, and you should definitely be able to max out 2 skills for every character, even if you're lazy with the searching of experience. The skill system is a nice diversion, but it isn't developed enough to make much of an impact on the game. Trine is the kind of game that lends itself very well to multiplayer gaming. There are, after all, 3 characters who are designed to be dependent upon one another. And multiplayer is included in the game, but for some reason I can't imagine there's no online multiplayer. It's one system only. I'm pretty sure there aren't any PC gamers in the world who actually have 2 real-life friends, so the inclusion of one system multiplayer is kind of self-defeating. Trine would have been an awesome game to play online with friends, and the absence of such a feature is tragic. And without multiplayer there isn't very much incentive to replay the game. The secret items and experience points are always there to be found, though you'll likely get most of them on your first playthrough. Trine quite naturally lends itself to playing speedruns, and it's a pity there's no timer feature. This all hurts the game, because it's not particularly long to begin with. You'll probably finish it in around 5 hours or perhaps less. The visual experience is flawless. The amount of detail that has gone into each level is quite amazing, and I often found myself stopping playing just to watch the game as I moved through a forest or a mine. And it's not just the backgrounds either. There's excellent use of foregrounds, and the lighting effects are great, though you may not notice it until you reach the level where you have to use flaming arrows to light torches. It's simply a stunningly beautiful game. Each level has its own look, and barring a few exceptions, you'll never have to look at the same kind of environment for too long. Temples, villages, forests, mines, and dungeons are all areas you'll explore, each looking amazing. There are a few great musical pieces throughout, especially the main theme, which I feel will be stuck in my head for months now. The voice work is flawless right across the board, but there are only a few characters and voices used quite sparsely. It's impossible to fault the sound at all. Trine is a little too short. There are too few incentives to replay. The combat is a little too underdeveloped, and the absence of online multiplayer is flabbergasting. But Trine has a pretty remarkable production value. The physics-based platforming is great, and it does a good job of reimagining some very old ideas and making them new again. It's very easy to recommend Trine to fans of platformers, or anyone who just wants to play a jaw-droppingly beautiful game.